So we have to be on our best behaviour now, you and me.
I'll try.
We're being recorded. Jenny, thank you for talking to me. I really appreciate it. It's really kind of you.
You're
Where are you, Jenny?
So right now I'm living in Tokyo. I'm in a suburb. I'm probably 10, 15 kilometers from downtown Tokyo.
Right. Okay. And what have you been doing for the last 3 months?
3 months. I've been pretty much working from home. So in Japan right now, there was a state of emergency that was happening from April, and it was just lifted this last week. And so they recommended that people who could stay home work from home. And so I'm an educator, so I've been doing all of my online. I'm a counselor, so all of my online counseling with my students through the internet. And most of the schools in Japan, up until this last week, have been closed as well. It was a very early closure back at the end of February.
So do you get the impression that the Japanese authorities have been fairly proactive here, or how do you think they've handled it?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think that there are a lot of factors that are working in the favor of Japan. It's a very polite and not so much a hands-on culture. There's not a lot of hugging. There's not a lot of handshaking. I find when I go outside, most everyone without fault is wearing a mask. And so I really find that is comforting when you go outside, or when I see people going on buses. Most people that are on the buses are wearing a mask.
Most, or pretty well everyone.
Pretty much everyone. It's uncommon to see someone not wearing a mask. And so I think that happens. It is difficult to get tested here. They've taken a different approach where anyone who is found positive is required to be in an isolation ward in a hospital. And so one thing that has happened is a lot of people have not been tested, or it has been difficult to get tested. The recommendation was that unless you had a fever for 4 days, or if you were over 65 and had a fever for 2 days, then you should call and be tested. And even then, it was difficult to be tested. But it seems to be a successful approach. And I don't know. That's what sources are saying. I don't speak Japanese, so I can't watch a lot of Japanese news. It does make me nervous, though. I stay in my house. And I go to the grocery store at 6 a.m. to avoid crowds as much as possible. So, and Japanese people definitely love being outside. Back at the end of March, right before the spike that happened in April, was cherry blossom season. And so the weekend before the state of emergency was declared, the parks were just full of people that were out. And I stayed home. And so it's hard to know for sure. The numbers are low, but do I think things are being underreported? Yeah. Would I be more comfortable if there was more testing and it was easily available? Absolutely.
But I mean, Japan's not known as a sort of covert government country, is it? I mean, it's an open Western style government. It's not like other governments that we could mention around the world that actively suppress information and control information. It would be surprised if there were grossly misreporting, wouldn't it? Or would it?
It would be. I don't think that there's a lot of misrepresentation. I do feel that there's just like with the state of emergency, one thing that was very interesting was there's not a law in Japan that they can force businesses to close. And so everything was a strong recommendation. And so businesses were recommended to close. And there's a lot of reliance on the people being respectful of rules and following rules in Japan. I think that's a big part of the Japanese culture. And so when the government says wear masks, people wear masks. When the government says wash your hands regularly, people tend to follow that advice. And so I think there's a lot of trust in government recommendations. But there's also some difficulties. There are a lot of people who have been unable to work from home and then are forced to be on the trains. In Tokyo, millions of people take the trains every day. I'm glad to see that people are now wearing masks. But I've definitely seen images of people, a couple of months back that wasn't the case as well. So,
I mean, you get the impression Japan is from outside, I get the impression Japan is a very disciplined sort of people, disciplined culture. Is that basically correct?
I would agree with that. And also a very considerate, people are considerate of their neighbors and, don't want to inconvenience or harm others. And that's a big part of just a respect for others and a desire to keep other people safe, I think is a big part of the culture as well.
And it is cultural to wear masks there already, isn't it? If people get a cold or whatever, they wear a mask as a routine.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're sick, you wear a mask.
Because I was in the supermarket yesterday and like no one wears masks in England. It's just not part of the culture. And in the States, I think it's pretty patchy whether people wear masks or not. I think some areas are very good and some areas not so good. But Japan, it's just second nature. Wearing a mask is just the same as putting a jacket on or something to go outside.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that is a real biggie. I think that could have made a big difference.
I would say I think that's probably the thing that has made the biggest difference, quite honestly. Because like I said, I go outside and probably, I don't know, 1 in 20 people maybe isn't wearing a mask. Like it's really uncommon not to see a mask. So
people are respecting the social distancing.
Yes, people are for the most part. It's the recommendation that just came out was 1 meter of social distancing, 2 meters if possible. And so because it is such a dense population here, it's difficult to be far away from people in such a crowded area. But I do believe that people are social distancing. And then, like I said, it's not a culture of handshaking or hugging either. And so I think that's helped too.
Yeah, I mean, have you known anyone who's had COVID-19?
That is a good question. I know people in the US that have had it. I know people here who have thought they had it and tried to get tested and weren't able to be tested. So I've had a couple of coworkers that have that thought they had it and then weren't able to be tested because they
didn't meet criteria.
Yeah, they had a fever, and then there was like a number that you could call and numbers for people that speak English. It's just been a very difficult process for people to navigate. I think especially more so difficult if you don't speak Japanese. And so,
even for native Japanese people, it sounds like the bar's fairly high to get tested.
It is. It's very high. One of the things that just got released was they will now allow asymptomatic people to be placed in hotels for quarantine. But previously, even if you were asymptomatic, you had to be in isolation wards. And so I think because people, if they had a positive, were automatically put in an isolation ward, there was, I think part of the philosophy has been we only want those that are very sick to be taking up hospital beds. And so the recommendation is, go home, monitor at home. And then, they had only been giving tests to people who had been hospitalized.
Yeah. Do you think the fact that if someone's tested positive, that they have to go to away from home to a controlled isolation unit, is that deterring people from having tests because they don't want to be quarantined in an isolation unit?
That's a great question. I don't think so. At least the people that I know, that I think people are cautious and nervous. I think if testing were widely available, people would be tested. But I do feel that there's just been a lot of measures put in place where it's been really difficult for people to get tested. Like you have to call the special hotlines, and, rumor on the street is only certain hospitals are taking COVID patients and other hospitals aren't. And so I think that there has been a reluctance by, and I think it has been like the not wanting to overwhelm the medical system here. And then there's been from everything that I've seen and read, there's been a reluctance by the government to test to capacity as well. I think the capacity last number that I saw was 24,000 a day. It's
not huge for the size of the country by any means. It's tiny.
No, I think the population in Japan is about 130 million. So it's a pretty big country. Yeah. But like one of the websites that I check regularly is the Tokyo Metropolitan Health website, and it tells you how many people have been tested every day and how many people have tested positive. And the last week or so, they've tested 30, 40 people, and and at the highest point, I think the highest number that I saw in a day that was tested was 1,000. And that was back when they were having numbers of 200 people testing positive every day. And so I still feel like it's a fairly small number of people that are being tested. And so it's hard to know, like, is it a successful strategy? I don't know. It makes me nervous, even though restrictions are lifted and I'm now allowed to go to movie theaters and health clubs, that's not in my plan. You know, I still plan to stay home and wear a mask when I go to the grocery store and be cautious because I don't feel comfortable personally at this point. And I think, you know, once the restrictions are even looser, I'm sure there'll be more cases, you know, like just like with everywhere.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, there were reports of hospitals in Tokyo being full. Have you got any knowledge of that?
What I think has happened is in the past few weeks that cases have gone down. Like as I've been looking at the numbers every day, there have been fewer and fewer cases. I think if you were to ask that question 3 weeks ago, the hospitals were reaching capacity. I think that number has gone down significantly in the past couple of weeks. But then, you know, this last weekend, the state of emergency was lifted. And then they're looking to have, you know, fewer restrictions now. And so it's an interesting spot to be in for Japan. I think it's kind of one of those watch this space sort of things to see what happens as restrictions are loosened and people going back to museums and libraries and movie theaters and gyms and all of those places.
Yeah, I mean, there is large cities all over Japan, of course, isn't there? But it seems to be Tokyo that seems to be in a bit of an epicenter, really.
Yes, it has been. Hokkaido in the north initially had a lot of cases. Most of the ski resorts are in Hokkaido. And so they believe that a lot of the people that came in February that were skiing had come in and had been infected. Another thing that's been happening in Japan right now is there's 111 countries that people aren't able to fly into Japan unless you have a Japanese passport. So like right now, if I left and went back to the United States, I wouldn't be able to come back, even though I'm a permanent resident. And so they've been very cautious with controlling who can come into Japan. And so I think that probably has also helped keeping the numbers down here as well.
So basically, I think you and me are a bit bemused at the moment then. We've got a country that's got very limited testing. You have been in a state of emergency, but not for that long. You've been locked down for a few weeks, but later than other countries. It's now lifting quite significantly. You can go to movie theaters tomorrow if you wanted to. It's lifting earlier than normal, and yet we seem, with a fairly open government, that we have very low cases. So it's kind of
I don't know. Like it's a mystery, and I will continue to have an abundance of caution in going about. But I do think face masks are probably one of the biggest things that are numbers low. That's the only thing that I can really think of that is probably
and the lack of physical touching. They don't hug and kiss and shake hands and So you greet someone in Japan like this, or what do you do?
People do bow. There is bowing. You know, I haven't been greeting people lately, so I don't know.
Okay. But it's not a physical thing. I think that's the thing.
People tend to respectfully bow or smile, but there's not handshaking or hugging really as a greeting. So it's more
sounds a bit boring, but if that's their culture, that's fine.
Seems to be working.
Right, so mask wearing, physical distancing, discipline. It's a very clean society as well. So cleaning of surfaces, cleaning of public areas.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
You
know, Thailand seems to be very similar. In Thailand, they had very, very limited testing. The outbreak was beginning back in January even, and I was quite worried about it because, you know, I've spent some time in Thailand. I know the situation there can be difficult, and it just doesn't seem to have been a problem. Everyone wears masks. They turned off the air conditioning. They opened the doors to let plenty of ventilation in. They practiced the social isolation, and it was this really low-tech approach to public health that seems to have really paid off. It's nothing clever. Just, you know, these basic common sense measures that basically everyone in the world knows about now. And it sounds like Japan's similar to that. It's I
think so. And I do believe because people here are very apt to follow recommendations, like they take recommendations seriously. And there can even be like a sense of shame if you're not doing the right thing, which, you know, I'm from the United States and I don't see any people showing any shame there for not wearing masks. Like, I think it's just a very different mindset about how, you know, how you follow what the government recommends and that you do. So
the social pressures to conform there, isn't there?
Yes, there is, for sure.
So if someone was not conforming, it'd be rather analogous to wearing no trousers and being drunk in our society. It's like a really major offence. Is that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Could be. I definitely think you would get, well, you get some raised eyebrows, which, you know, probably, but, you know, definitely there's a sense of you don't want to let other people down. There's a restaurant owner that was quoted as, you know, I didn't have to close, but I didn't want to be responsible for starting a cluster at my restaurant. Like there's that kind of mentality with people who don't want to be responsible for making other people sick.
And that is a genuine concern for others.
Yeah, I really feel that way. Like that's something that I really have felt living in Japan, is that people genuinely are respectful of other people. It's just a big part of Japanese culture. And so I think that has played well into, you know, and people tend to stay out of each other's space. And those are big helps, I think, in a situation like this.
I think it just shows we have things to learn from every culture. You know, ideally, we could take all the good things from all these different cultures in the world and synergize them into one. It'll never happen, but you know, between all the races and cultures of humanity, we've probably got it about right, but we don't quite seem to manage to put it all together in one place at the right time.
No, that is the question, right? How do we do that?
Yeah. Are they using any mobile phone apps to control?
You know, not that I'm aware of. Now there could be. Like I said, I speak very limited Japanese. I've only been here about a year, and much of that time has been inside. Right. So I don't know that's, and I haven't read anything in English news from Japan that says that mobile phone tracing is a thing. I don't think that's happening, but I could be wrong.
Would Japanese culture be open to that possibility more so than, say, Western culture?
I would think so. I would think if the government said, "Hey, we're using tracing. Can you put this app on your phone?" I think people would. Yes.
You know, there's something I'm a bit reluctant to say, Jenny, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's some provisional data from the United States that shows that Asians. So when you say Asians in the United States, you normally mean people from Japan, Korea, China. When we say Asians in the UK, we normally mean the subcontinent. So it's a bit confusing. So Asians to me would be Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. So, but there's some evidence that Asians, and indeed some evidence from the UK, from the Office for National Statistics, that Chinese, Koreans, Japanese, the East Asian peoples do seem to get less severe COVID-19 disease. Now, the jury is still out on that, you know, because we know tragically that African Americans, for example, have a very high complication and death rate, as indeed do Asian people in the UK. But there's some early evidence that shows these East Asians are getting less severe disease. And that's going to be a really interesting one. And I'm just wondering how big a factor it is, whether it's something about lifestyle, whether it's something about genetics, whether it's something about the cultural behaviors that you've, you know, it's a fascinating interface between the mind, the behavior, the biology, everything like that. And
right. Well, or like if you look at, you know, food studies, you know, you look at what people have traditionally eaten in Asia, and you have people living long. You know, if you look at more plant-based diets and those kinds of things, which are more traditional in Asia, I wonder if that has something to do with it as well.
Indeed. The classic one, of course, is breast cancer. The low rates of breast cancer in Japan, the high rates of breast cancer in the UK and the States. And there was a fascinating study done on GI brides, because obviously a lot of young American guys going to Japan just after the war, inevitably there were marriages. Quite a large cohort of young Japanese women went to the States. And after they'd been in the States for like 30, 40 years, their incidence of breast cancer increased.
Yep.
not as high as those that have been in the States all their lives, but their daughters had the same incidence as people brought up in the States. So that's strongly indicating there's something about the lifestyle there that's so much more to come on that. Like to learn more about that.
It would be really interesting, and I would love to see. So I'm plant-based. I have been for several years. I would love to see a study on people that are, you know, eating plant-based diets versus people who aren't, and how that, you know, relates to COVID-19. So I think that there, like you said, there's so much that we don't know yet. and so many factors. But I do think that, just Asian lifestyle and, could all be part of that.
What is the cultural attitude to Japan about sunbathing?
Oh, people don't sunbathe, really.
Right,
people
okay.
like to be in the sun, but women will cover their arms with.
Right.
There's definitely you don't want to have darker skin. Like there's, you cover up when you go outside. So people do love to be out in the sun, but Japanese women will wear the big floppy brimmed hats and wear long sleeves, and so that's definitely happens here, I think.
It was the same with my students in Cambodia. They're just this beautiful light brown color. But, they cover up in the sun because they don't want to be darker brown, because for some reason, they seem to think to be light is they look pretty good to me either way. It doesn't bother me, but it's...
I don't want to get skin cancer. So I tend to either wear sunscreen or to cover up. But yeah, it's interesting. In China as well, when I lived there, people would definitely also, you didn't sunbathe, you wanted to cover up and not crisp up in the sun, which is probably smart.
Well, the reason I'm asking is for the vitamin D, because of course in the sun you'd make lots more vitamin D, and we know that's an immunologically protective substance. So well, that knocks that piece of epidemiology on the head then.
Well, you can I do take a vitamin D supplement. You can get that here. I think people do take vitamins and supplements here, and people do go outside. Like there's definitely a culture of being outside and exercising and being in parks. And so people are definitely outside in the sun. They just tend to be, wearing longer sleeves or hats to not
they won't make the vitamin D. I think vitamin D deficiency is a big factor in darker skinned people around the world. Because basically darker skin is for the tropics.
Right.
And if you're in the tropical sun, you'll make enough vitamin D, but in the north of England or Chicago, you won't. And it's known that African Americans have very low levels of vitamin D, and that's something I've been trying to publicize. It's I'm not saying it's the be all and end all, but it's a variable that it's easy to eliminate.
Right, and if it's something that's easy to do, I mean, that's why I've been taking vitamin D, because you've recommended take vitamin D, and it's an easy thing to do.
Easy to do, yeah.
It won't do any harm. And, I think that, if there are things that are easier for us to do in a situation like this, why wouldn't we do that?
Sensible doses won't do any harm, that's for sure. Yeah. How much do you take? Do you know?
I think it's a 25 milligram a day.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That's actually quite a low dose. Yeah.
Maybe I should take another one.
Are you okay for time, Jenny? I've got a couple more things. Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about a trip. Tell me about a trip to the shops for you. What happens?
Yeah, so I usually go early in the morning. Many people in Japan, I don't have a car, so I have an electric bike, and so I hop on my bike.
Way to go, Jenny! Way to go!
With my face mask. I've been sewing lots of face masks, and so I put my face mask on, and I go to the store. One thing that is great when I go, like there's hand sanitizer at the front when you walk in the door.
Right, so the sanitizer at the front of the shop. Yep.
They also now have
does everyone use it?
Everyone uses it.
Right. That's the biggie. This social discipline.
Yeah, people use the hand sanitizer. And then there's also an arrow for come in this way and go out this way.
So all one way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that so much within the aisles, but definitely coming in and out. All of the workers in the grocery store are wearing masks. One thing that I have noticed is like the big garden stores here. People in Japan are such wonderful gardeners, and so the garden stores have been open and crowded. The last time I went, I was a little nervous because it was super, super crowded. But I tend to do my grocery shopping at 6 a.m, either on a Saturday or before I start my work day. And so there's usually only a few people there, but people are there. They're wearing masks. People are respectful. I also do like the wide berth around people. If someone gets a little close, I tend to.
Everyone seems to be complying with that.
Yeah, people do. People are cautious and they notice that other people are around. And then they also have plastic barriers up around the cash registers. And then on the floor, there's like a 1, 2, and a 3 marked out for customers to stand on as they're waiting. People are using baskets. I don't know how baskets are being cleaned. I know when I come in, I tend to get a little extra hand sanitizer and rub it on my basket as I as I walk through the store.
Yeah. Right. That's another. There's a couple other factors there. There's the hand sanitization on the way in, which of course is going to protect people from me as potentially contaminated. There's that social discipline there, and of course a lot of people use electric bikes, which are in the fresh air.
Yeah, many people are on bikes. A lot of people are also on buses. That's one area, and I do see people when they get on buses are wearing masks. Like I haven't been on a bus since the beginning of March because I've been cautious about that. But yeah, many people, like most stores have bike parking lots.
Yeah, and the cycling, like the safe, so you can cycle safely there. There's biking lanes and things.
Yeah, there's biking lanes next to all of the major streets. Either a path for walkers and bikers, and then there's also on the side of the streets a painted lane for bikers. And so usually there's, you could be on the road or you could be in your own lane off of the road as well. So and people are with right of way here as well. Like the person who is the smallest has the right of way, and so people are careful with that too. So
right. So if you're on a bike, you give way to pedestrians. If someone's in a car, they give way to you as a cyclist.
Yes.
It's just such common sense, isn't it? Why don't we do that? It's just such common sense. I mean, it's interesting in Europe. There's quite a few people, like Rome, for example, has instigated another 150 kilometers of cycle track. Milan, I think it was about 50 or 60 kilometers. People are realizing that to get numbers down on crowded public transport, then cycling is the way to go. And if people aren't fit enough to cycle, electric bikes are so readily available these days. It's even if you've got a damaged ankle or something, you can still ride an electric bike. It's
yeah. I lived in Sweden 25 years ago, and Sweden definitely has bike paths. Like that is one place in Europe where there's, and they do, it's harder to cycle in February in Sweden, but there are definitely bike and cycle paths there too that in most places. So
I think we've identified a few factors between us about Japan. We've got the ordered society, the non-tactile, the wearing masks, the good hygiene in and out of shops, the cycling culture. All these really simple things could partly explain why the pandemic basically has not taken off there, and the incident rate and the death rate appears to be relatively low. Of course, the big test is going to be with the release in the lockdown measures, whether that increases the transmissibility. Whether it raises this R number above 1 and it starts spreading again. But so far it's looking pretty good, and I really can't quite explain why. It's
I can't either. Yeah, I've scratched my head many times thinking, when is it going to take off? We'll see. Next week they're opening amusement parks and slot machine parlors, so maybe that'll be when people are having a little too much contact.
Yeah, let's hope not, but it's interesting. I mean, if we compare this to the riots in the States at the moment are just so distressing to watch, isn't it? It's just it's upsetting on so many levels. The problems that caused it in the first place was clearly an outrage, and then but the right's been taken over by extremists. Personally, I couldn't care less if it's far right or far left extremists. The point is, there's lawlessness, there's looting, there's and all the physical contact that goes with that. We've got, it kind of reminds me of Mardi Gras. In New Orleans, there was a huge spike about 6 weeks after that, and there is no question there's going to be a huge spike in the States now. That's not a matter of debate. That's going to happen.
I agree, and I worry for my family that lives in the States.
Which state are you from, Jenny?
Well, that's a great question. My parents live in Tennessee. They're in Nashville, and I have a brother in Florida and a sister in Kentucky. And then a lot of my extended family is out west, in Idaho and Utah. And so, like Nashville right now has had a big spike in cases, and my parents talk about going to the store and people not wearing masks, and it's frightening that it breaks my heart that people won't put on a mask to keep other people safe. Like, I just don't understand it.
And the way things like wearing a mask, which is a purely physiological, biological intervention, has become politicized is just so unfortunate. It's just
I don't understand it. Like, I just don't understand why, if you couldn't do, like, it's so simple. It's such a simple and easy thing to do to protect other people. it has nothing to do with, it's not political. It's biological, and people should wear masks.
And 130 million Japanese seem to have worked that out.
Yeah, and I take my hat off to Japan for being considerate of other people and not worrying quite as much about, is it a right or not? Because it's, it's considerate, it's kind, it's what we should do as humans.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that great thing about working in other cultures, we can, if we've got the humility to learn from other cultures, then, it's a win-win situation, isn't it?
It is. I agree. Yeah.
Now, I've heard you're a bit of an international lady, Jenny. You spent a bit of time in China.
Yes. Yeah, I lived in Guangzhou, China from 2011 to 2019.
Right. Okay. To 2019.
Yeah, I moved. I moved to Tokyo at the end of July 2019. Okay. I've been here for about a year. So
you're doing similar educational work in China?
Yes. Yeah, I was working in an international school as well there as a school counselor. So.
Right. So. In terms of Chinese culture, did you get the impression that it's fairly considerate and disciplined like the Japanese culture, or is there differences there?
I would say that it's different. I will say in China, when when the government says you need to do this, people do it.
So there's the compliance aspect there.
There's definitely compliance. People do wear masks there as well.
Again, that's cultural, is it, in China?
It is. I would say that Japanese culture, I think there tends to be a little bit more consideration of others. That's part of the culture. But I would say in Chinese culture, when you're asked to comply by the government, that you comply. And that's a big part of the culture. And I think that's why numbers are low. And then I will say, as I've looked and I've watched, I fully believe that once China realized it was a problem, they got it under control. They get stuff done there. And so I have friends that are still there that have said they feel very safe, and that they essentially were under lockdown for quite a while, and that they, when they went outside, they had to wear masks. They were told to go to the store every 3 or 4 days. And that's what people did. And I do believe that's why numbers in China have stayed so low, because people have followed those rules and regulations. Was there a slow start? Yeah. But is there conscientious control of things now? Yes. And my friends who were there, and schools have started to reopen there as well. I have friends that work in the school that I was at, that kids are back in school. They're using social distancing. They're wearing masks. There are fewer students on campus, but they've been able to reopen things, and things are opening back up in China in ways that aren't happening yet in the US or Canada or in the UK. So
that was my impression very much. That, I mean, obviously the Chinese made a complete hash of it at the beginning, and the suppression at the very start of the pandemic. But once the information got out, the corporate action was taken. The national action was taken. People complied with that, and
right.
I believe that the low figures in China now are completely genuine. It's they have succeeded in quelling this pandemic, as indeed as South Korea and Taiwan as well. They seem to be equally successful. So having lived in China, you think there's aspects of Chinese culture that does account for this success?
I think so. I just believe that, when people are asked, or there are government things that are put in place, people do, because you do. That's just how it works. And also there is a will to get things done in China. When
there is a collective spirit, isn't there?
There's very much, people are very much about families and things. And when the announcement was made that they were going to test all 11 million people in Wuhan, I was like, yep, they'll probably have that done in about a week. Because, when they set their minds that they will do something or that they will make it happen, it happens. And so I do believe that there is a desire to keep people healthy, and, to keep things from spreading. And a lot of it, whether that's economic or whether that's compassion, hard to say, but definitely I think that there is a will in China to have this under control, and that they will take, if they're great, I'm glad they're testing 11 million people in Wuhan. I think that's a fabulous move. And I believe that they'll do that, and they'll represent the data in a way that's correct.
So unfortunately, it looks like the epicenters now are going to move to the American continent, basically. Canada's not doing too brilliantly. The lines are pretty flat in Canada. The United States, we've just expressed pessimism. And South America, of course, we know there's major difficulties in Brazil, Peru, areas like that. But the irony seems to be is that the original place, the China, the Japan, the South Korea, Taiwan, where this started, is they seem to have got a handle on it. And it just, I just really hope someone's watching who can think about these ideas as to these societies have done so much better, frankly,
right?
Than yours and my country and yours and my society have done. And I just really think we need the sort of humility to question our own cultural attitudes, to say, well, what do we learn from these other cultures? And I just feel people like you are in an ideal position to communicate that information.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And, it's having lived in so many places and having experienced the good in so many different cultures, you can see that. And you do have to step back. I think it takes humility, as you said earlier, to recognize things that maybe you haven't gotten right, or to make sacrifices when it's not comfortable. I think, in America, there's often, there's a lot of individualism, which is great in many ways, but it's not really great when you're in a pandemic. You need to think more about keeping other people safe than individual needs. And I think that's a beautiful part of Japanese culture, is that there is that idea of let's take care of others. And that exists in America, of course, and it exists in the UK. I just wish that it existed a little bit more right now.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Makes me.
Jenny, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that. Really appreciate those insights, and it certainly got me thinking. I'm sure it's got many people thinking around the world. I suppose you better tell us where else you work, though, if you don't mind.
Right. So, well, I'm from the United States. So in 2004, I moved overseas and I worked in Valencia, Venezuela for 2 years at an international school there. Yeah, it was before things as they are now.
Before things got as bad as they are. I mean, it's a terrible situation there now, isn't it?
And I still have friends there.
It's basically economic collapse, isn't it? It's
pretty much. Yeah, it's yes, economic collapse and government collapse. And I hope no one's listening and comes to find me.
I think it's a pretty open secret, isn't it? I mean, it's.
Yeah, it is. It's really hard. Most of the people that I know there.
It's on all the international news outlets. Everyone, everyone knows this. We're not.
That have the means to leave have left, and those that are left are those that can't leave because they're in poverty and they're left to suffer.
The falling consequences of the migration. You got what, tens of thousands of Venezuelans basically camped out in Mexico.
Yeah, and then also Brazil, and a lot of those that were affluent left, and a big Venezuelan community in Miami as well. But anyway. So Venezuela, we could talk about that for a couple of hours. And then Venezuela,
and the pandemic is increasing there greatly, of course.
It is, and I don't think that when I look at the numbers there, I don't believe that it's represented well, just based on the fact that there really isn't medical supply there. There's no supply chain in Venezuela. You can't. That was actually one place where you couldn't get toilet paper. Believe it or not. Yeah, no. And so just food there is hard to come by, much less medical supplies. And so I can only imagine what's probably happening to people there, because there's already that everyone's hungry. You can't get basic supplies. And so to have medical care, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's kind of almost a luxury, isn't it?
It is.
So yeah. When you were there, was it a fairly poor country, or when were you there, Jenny? Sorry.
I was there from 2004 to 2006, and so it was kind of right at the height of Chavez, and his implementing a lot of his social policies, and so things were much better than they are now. They were much more stable than they are now. There was definitely opposition to what he was doing, and there was certainly poverty, but I felt like it was a relatively safe place at the time. I could go to the grocery store. I had no problem meeting basic needs. People went to restaurants and beaches and those kinds of things. It was a pretty normal life when I was there. Yeah. And that's not the case now at all. So, yeah.
And with the lack of medical facilities there now, it's going to mean greatly increased case fatality rate, I think.
Right. And medical facilities were good when I was there. The couple of times that that I needed to have medical care, I had great doctors and great medical care when I was there.
I've heard that 50% of the doctors have left the country now, just as one illustration of the problems.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I was there, and then I was in Dubai for about 3 years.
Okay. Yeah.
And then from Dubai, I moved back to the United States.
Tell us something about Dubai.
Dubai, I was there at the time that they were building the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, and so I think it was at about 77th floor when I moved there, and so I watched it go up for 3 years, and then I left about 3 months before it was opened, and so I haven't been back to Dubai since it opened, and so I'd like to go back to be able to see it. Very interesting city. Can
you drive from Dubai just to Abu Dhabi? Can you just drive through?
Yeah. Yes, you can drive. And it, much more, like, as a woman, I was able to drive. I didn't have to cover. I didn't wear an abaya like you would need to if you were in Saudi Arabia. So it was, quite free in terms of, what people think of the Middle East. It was a really easy place to live. They're very convenient. Yeah, I mean, you could go skiing at the mall, so that was interesting.
Of course, half the population, or probably more than half the population, of workers there anyway. So you get Asians. South Asians.
When I was there, it was about 50% of the population was from India, and it was people that were working and building. And I think the population has doubled since I left. When I was there, I believe it was about 4 million, and I think it's closer to 9 million now.
I was only there for a short time, but you could always get a really good, cheap Indian meal.
Oh, goodness, yes. I lived in a very Indian neighborhood, and I had such good Indian food delivered to my house, and it was so inexpensive. That's the thing that I miss about Dubai, is the
vegetarian food as well.
Amazing vegetarian Indian food. Yeah, it was
fantastic.
Heaven for that. It was so great.
Yeah. Amazing. Where did you go after that?
I moved back to the United States. I moved to Denver for 2 years because I thought, I'm in my 30s. I need to move back and be closer to family. And that lasted for 2 years. And then I moved to China, where I was for 8 years. And now I've been in Japan for a year.
Okay. Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah.
Oh,
So that's great, Jenny. So your plans for the next sort of few months are you planning on staying in Tokyo, or?
Yeah, I plan on staying here. Usually in the summer, I travel home to see family. But right now, like I said, if I leave Japan, there's no guarantee that I can come back, and I wouldn't want to travel. My parents are in their 70s. My sister has lupus.
You couldn't really go on an airplane and then go to your parents' house, could you?
No. And so like those, I wouldn't want to put other people at risk by traveling. So I plan on doing a lot of reading and crafting and yoga and making some more masks. And
have you got any masks there?
I do, yeah.
You might as well show them off.
Yeah, so I've been making.
If you got it, flaunt it, Jenny.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I've been just sewing masks. So I've got a whole little container here that still need to be finished.
Seriously cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been nice. I've been able to. I think I've probably taken somewhere between 200 and 300 to work, just so people at work can have washable, reusable face masks. And it's been, it's been a small way that I feel like I've been able to help. Like, as a counselor, my job is helping and talking to people, and I like to be helpful. And so it's just been a way that, even though I can't be in the same place as people, there are ways that I can help people. And so that's just been a way to do that. And I love that people have been finding ways to help in this pandemic, that to be creative about it. And so that's just one little thing that I've been able to do. So
I don't think it's a little thing. I think the masks break up the physical momentum of the air, and that's what protects other people. I think it's a huge thing.
Oh, thank you.
And it's let's hope the entire population of the United States are listening, Jenny, and the United Kingdom. I very much doubt it, but
I know, yeah. So I plan to keep a low profile the next couple of months, and to stay in as much as possible. Go out for some nice walks while I'm on my summer break, and ride my bike, but wear my mask while I'm biking and walking, and try to keep a good 2 to 3 to 4 meters distance. That's my hope.
Yeah. So if anyone's still listening to my YouTube videos in a couple of months' time, we'd love to if you come back and tell us how things are going.
Absolutely.
It's going to be so interesting. I mean, I know. I don't mean to say this is interesting, because we're talking about people's lives here, but it is interesting that how are these lifting these lockdown measures in Japan? I kind of get the feeling that in theory it's going to make things a lot worse. There's going to be a lot more cases, But given Japan's track record, I kind of get this strange non-scientific feeling that it's going to go quite well there. And I just hope I'm right. It's
I would love if that's the outcome. Like if the outcome is that I can feel safe going out and doing some shopping and having like going to my favorite sushi place for veggie sushi, like that'd be awesome. And I hope that happens, but I will still remain cautious, and I hope that people here still stay cautious.
Right. I mean, scientifically, I think I would have to predict that there's going to be an increase in cases in Japan now as a result of the opening up. And there's no question there will be some increases in cases. The question is whether this leads to this accelerated growth again. And let's hope it doesn't. But it's going to be interesting to see if these simple strategies that Japanese culture, that emerge from Japanese culture, are going to carry on keeping the pandemic COVID-19 levels down. And if they are, there'll be an even bigger lesson for the world to learn from that. So
right, and I hope that it is that lesson. Like I hope that that have been done. I hope that's why. I hope that not that under testing has misrepresented things. I really hope it is that the numbers are close to accurate. Like that would be the best case scenario that could come out of Japan. I would hope.
I mean, there's no question with limited testing that there are masses of undiagnosed cases. But it still doesn't seem to have taken off. You don't seem to get that many people that are getting that sick. And interesting, fascinating one. Jenny, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Campbell.
I'm not Dr. Campbell, I'm John.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much, John, for having me.
I'm only an academic anyway, I'm not important. I'm going to stop this recording just a minute, Jenny. Let me see if I can stop this recording.